this episode of Wanted, a Midlife Hobby, we prove yet again that variety is the spice of life by talking about another new hobby option, cooking. We'll mix it up with Matt Hopkins, a good egg from Gaithersburg, Maryland, who will serve up some food for thought about getting started with your cooking hobby, hopefully in a way that won't make you feel like you're biting off more than you can chew. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the February episode of Wanted, a Midlife Hobby. I am so happy to have with me here today Matt Hopkins. Matt, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And I am the personal recipient of some of Matt's good works in the cooking arena. I have had, in fact, I got to start out with a story because there was an event that I was at. Matt, you were cooking with, I'm going to see if I say this right, a paella?
Yeah, paella. Yeah.
Paella. Okay. So I actually took a picture of it. I texted it to some of my friends from high school, and one person texted back within seconds. That is the biggest damn paella I have ever seen in my life.
Yeah, it's not an accident. We looked long and hard for that pot. It's a beautiful 3 foot, well, it's a little bit larger than 3 foot diameter paella pan. It's really fantastic.
It was huge. It was huge.
Yeah.
And
it's a lousy thing to cook food in, but it's, dramatic, right?
But I will tell you, the food was dramatic too. So yeah. I was, not traumatic, dramatic. It was definitely really good. So
dramatic for Andrea, for my wife, but
I have a feeling at some point that's going to come up more in our discussion too. But
I'm sure any midlife hobby podcast is more about the spouses barely hanging on by their fingernails than about the hobby itself, right? Which is part of why we do it. Frankly, part of the whole cooking thing. I'm big and loud and noisy, and I make a mess, and I'm throwing stuff all over the place. And my version of cooking is chaos, and with the sort of distant, ephemeral intent. But it drives my more methodical wife absolutely crazy. She cannot be in a kitchen, and drives her nuts.
Well, how'd you get started with it in the first place? What led you down the cooking path?
Well, I mean, I think if your podcast is these great hobbies, right? And we're all this whole COVID thing, and then the ongoing several millennial issue of midlife, and all these things sort of come together. But we got to eat, so but cooking, I'm not, it's a craft for sure. But a lot of the sort of midlife hobbies are not necessities. They're indulgences, or they can be personal, or they can be communal. And I know that my cooking is based in communal need to hang out with some friends and people, and impress upon them my love for them, right? So it's really in essence comes down to no other idea other than the fact that I love some people, not all people, but some people, and they're great people, and I can, and there's a bunch of ways I can show them I love them, and being a sarcastic, self-amused, I have to show it in other ways other than, and so cooking is I think a great way to force folks to gather, and then force them to stay there for a little bit, and then show them the love, right? So it's really just an excuse to get some folks together and drink too much wine and run around. And then it's a topic of conversation too. So what are you gonna do? You're talking about traffic or some other thing. My family, we're famous for, as we're cooking, especially the men in the kitchen, we're usually talking about the next meal, right? So that was just how the men in my family interacted. We'd sit in my dad's kitchen or my grandfather's kitchen, and we would talk, with a bottle or two or three or four of wine with my uncles and all those, and my cousins, and we would talk about the next meal, and even as we were cooking, which is always fun. But
yeah. And was your dad a good cook also?
Yeah, Dad was a great cook. Mom was a utilitarian cook, and Mom did a great job of feeding us. Sort of big picture. Food has a tiered structure, right? It's sustenance. We got to eat. We have cravings or whatever, so that there's that sort of bodily necessity. And then I think of cooking as when it hits craft is when it sort of splits into two larger ideas. One is nostalgia, and the other is art or craft, or elevated craft. And for me, it's there's a science to baking. There's a science to craft brewing, which is really just baking, and there's a science to anything that is indisputably narrowed towards a truth. And art is something that is constantly allowed to be pulled apart, in order to get to some sort of self-expression or some sort of individuality, right? So they're two sides of the same coin, right? Art and science. But I think when we talk about the nostalgia aspect, it's that thing where, a matzo ball soup, a cassoulet for me and my French ancestry, there's certain things that, you can have someone goes right back to their mother, their grandmother, their grandfather. Even if they didn't, it could be a constructed sort of nostalgia. My French lineage is 2 generations back, but I still attach to it as a Francophile with no real, growing up in DC, I have no real immersion in culture, French culture, but it's an affectation, that I love, right? And it's that nostalgia doesn't have to be my nostalgia. Smoked lox and on a beautiful bagel is a sort of the diaspora of Judea, and it created this perfect little breakfast sandwich, and with capers and the pickled onions and the red onions, and that's something that the diaspora sort of put together that it speaks to me, even though it's not the best breakfast sandwich, but because it has a nostalgic and a cultural sort of weight on it, I love it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's another end that's really the high art of cooking, which I don't do, because I'm a hobbyist, right? There is, and I have great respect for that art of cooking, the true art of cooking, but it's different. It's different than the craft of cooking. It's there for something different, and that it truly is art. That is somebody who's picking it apart and making it something, a true expression of themselves or humanity or terroir or something else that they're really trying to sort of make an expression of that's beyond sustenance. It's beyond social aspects. It's beyond nostalgia, or it could be related to any of those things, but it'll be in a way that where it's pulled it apart. That's art.
I feel like you've created a Maslow hierarchy of cooking, kind of, there's like that, it's like you take your way up the pyramid a little bit, maybe not all the way to the peak, but you like to go up there a little bit. I don't know if that's
yeah. And that's part of the fun of cooking, right? Is that I'm going to eat, I'm an eater. And I guess that might be a necessity to come in the room, those folks that just eat power bars all day or whatever, and don't have no sort of emotional connection to food, which I understand. Everybody's different, right? But I'm not interested in talking to them at my party.
Right.
No, I'm just kidding. But everybody's different. But those are somebody else, right? Not part of today's conversation. But I think it's one of the great things about it is that we got to eat, so spending, and that may be the most expensive part of this hobby of cooking as a hobby, is trying to go out and hit restaurants because there's a chef who's doing something different, or there's a Bangladeshi restaurant that opened up and I never had Bangladeshi food. I want to see what the flavor profiles and the techniques and the just sort of base cooking ideas. It's all the same pot of stuff, right? That sort of Eurasian spice thing, right? France to China, the 2 great cuisines just happen to sit at either end of that sort of end of Eurasia, where they traded all these ideas and domesticated animals and spices and everything. No coincidence that the 2 barbell ends of that became the 2 great cuisines of the world. And I think that, my, love of going to a restaurant and getting something I haven't ordered before and then trying to pick it apart in my brain because there's stuff in there that I haven't really tasted before, even though I see that it's another stew, it's another, flatbread. It's another, it's another fried bread, right? Which everybody in the world does, right? And, I really I love the little twists that everybody has on it. And why is some of the fun. One of my favorite books is a cooking book. I'm a reader, but one of my favorite books is a cooking book, history book, kind of mishmash from India. But it's, how did a lot of these recipes develop and things like that. And so as a hobby, I can do it lazily by saying, oh yeah, I want to cook a little bit of Indonesian. So let's go hit an Indonesian restaurant. And then I'll play around with the flavors in my head or, subconsciously, maybe even. And
do you talk to the chefs? Do you ever ask to talk to the chefs?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm an old architect, and so I, designed some restaurants and worked with some chefs over the years, and they are, on balance a bunch of assholes, but for the, but when you find some nice guys, they're really excited to share with you, So there's that whole phenomenon we have with the celebrity chef thing, and some of them took it a little too seriously, but a lot of those guys are still artists, and a lot of them too. I can't think of her name from Two Amy's, but she was just a craft master of some what we would probably call simple stuff, right? Really simple, clean, 3, 4, 5 ingredient dishes, and just done really, really well, which is not my strong suit as a, whatever we're going to call it, hobbyist or cook, home cook. My strong suit is I'm going to get it wrong 30% of the time. So a third of the meals that I make are not inedible, but they're not what I intended them to be.
Yeah.
The other 2/3 are okay, and they're fun, and they're usually a little bit different, or they're more extravagant, or they're a little more unctuous or whatever.
Yeah. All right. So I'm kind of curious because I was, so far I've heard you talk about books. I've heard you talk about actually trying the food, chefs. Are there other resources you use when you're trying to learn how to, I know you play, right? You just do it and you play, but are there other resources that you reach? Talking to somebody who's like starting out, what would you tell me? Where do I need to go to learn more?
Yeah. There's, I think, more cookbooks than there are people right now. Right. But it seems to me like a great place to start. I don't, if you're really starting, I'm sure you got to run down a few, basic recipes in order just to learn a few techniques, and then to, begin to get your nose to respond to whatever it is. If you're sauteing something, it's your nose. It's not the timer, that's going to tell you when it's right. It's going to be visually right. It's going to be, but really, it's that smell when that caramelization of whatever it is, just gets just right. That's why, I'm often in the other room getting distracted by somebody or something, or a glass of wine or whatever. And and then my nose will go ding, 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 and then I'm like, oh crap, I gotta run back, and it's like not quite burnt, but but it's that little hippocamptic nose, connection that sort of goes, and then I run back and and get it. And so I think that probably, just learning what you can do, which is probably half the hobby issues in the world, woodworking. I don't do it because I'm lazy, but I really admire guys who are doing it. And part of that basic craft is just getting to know what the tools are and what you can do, right? And then once you learn what you can do, then you start experimenting, and then you start putting things together. What does paprika taste like? I mean, it's such a weird spice. It's such a beautiful spice, but it's kind of a thing that those of us who grew up in the Anglo-Western Americanized East Coast world don't really know how to use paprika. We don't really know what to do with it. And so you got to hit a recipe or talk to a chef, but hit a recipe and then, with paprika in it. And then you'll begin to learn what it's like. So I would say cookbooks are the obvious, if you don't have a sort of family tradition to start with, although I think that can be limiting too, like, my dad had a midlife crisis where he started cooking Chinese, right? So when I would come home from school, there'd be a bunch of things on the table he wanted me to chop up because all of his recipes were everything had to be fork or chopstick sized things, and then he would fire them up in the wok and put his spices together, and so that that midlife crisis to me was somewhat about the recipes that he picked up, but at the time, really what it was is he was taking Tai Chi just for exercise and health down in Chinatown. And of course they'd go out and have, a little bit of food afterwards, and with his sensei or whoever, and just hanging out a little bit in Chinatown. And then the nose starts going. And so his, what he had been cooking, his French tradition of cooking, or what things he had been doing, or as a Marylander, fish and crabs and whatever. And, really kind of evolved into this palate that he was, discovering midlife. Because this is before Americans discovered food, right? That was still a hamburger world in the 70s, and hamburgers and hot dogs were the epitome of American cuisine, So It wasn't really until I think, I don't know, late 90s, 2000s that we said, oh, there's food out there,
Yeah.
And then, you couldn't be in Gaithersburg, Maryland and go to a Bangladeshi restaurant back then. But now you can. And so, but anyway, I got off track there. I don't even remember what your question was, but but I think that his trigger, that's what it was, is his trigger where he learned was really just sort of eating in the restaurant. So when he ate, 12 different dishes, he said, oh, there's some similarities between those dishes. And then he went to a Chinese cookbook, and then learned the flavor profiles and how to cook it. And of course, you have to get the toys, the little spatula and the wok.
Well, okay. So the toys. So, you have a lot of toys. I think, is it safe to say, right?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, and then compare it to somebody who's just starting. Because one of the questions I like to ask people is, what kind of financial investment will it take to kind of get serious about this hobby?
Well, I mean, I can't imagine anybody's not cooking now, right? Especially if they're concerned about financial investment, they're cooking, right? It's hard to eat out all the time and not cook. I think you can do it, but it's certainly not a cheaper alternative. And if it is, you're probably killing yourself, right? So I think if the stuff that a lot of Americans, some Americans I know have in their kitchen for equipment is definitely subpar. Those aluminum pans and the kind of sticky, weird, or the nonstick stuff that's basically bioretentive neurotoxins in a being heated, just close to their volatile organic compound limit, and it's something that's really just kind of asinine, but like a really good cast iron pan, which you can get from Lodge for nothing. I mean, I don't know what they're $20 for a big cast iron pan. It's just idiots like me who go and buy all the Staub, glazed ceramic with cast iron inside and every size for no particular reason, other than boy, they sure are pretty, and it's cooking porn, right? So I go into Sur la Table, and it's just they put a new lid on that pot, so I got to get the pot, right?
Gotcha.
So I have far more pots than I have storage for pots, but yeah, I mean, I think a good cast iron, particularly one with a lid, if you can get one, and you get those cheap. They require a little bit of care, a little bit of seasoning, but and then if you really want to make something that's something you're gonna love, is like a 3-quart cast iron Staub or Le Creuset or something like that. Or I think Lodge is making them. I think Lodge is making the bigger ones now. Maybe I'm sure they all make them now. Now that it's sort of Americans are cooking more, I'm going to bet that there's a ceramic glazed or cast iron interior, ceramic outside pots out there for not the ridiculous,
like a Dutch oven kind of thing, you mean, or a
Dutch oven, right? Yeah, sorry, Dutch oven.
Okay, yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah. There's the only 2 cooking words I've learned so far, so I had to throw them out there at some point.
Yeah, you're right. And everybody's grandmother had a Dutch oven, right? And then somewhere we lost them, and now we're kind of getting them back. And if you get one that's slightly big enough, 3 or 4 or 5 quarts. You can do all your frying in it too, or whatever it is you're doing, sauteing, and you don't have to do just the chili or the roast or whatever it is you normally do in your Dutch oven.
Gotcha. What's your favorite thing to cook? What do you like to do best?
Well, I'm actually fairly limited in my skill set. I like the big unctuous stews, right? So I'm a gumbo, big leek soups. The big anything that's big, I made my kids have decided they stopped eating mammals a while ago. Now they're stopping eating birds. So last night I made a vegan chili, which I was mad about the whole time I was making it, but I made, pot of chili, and I really did. Actually, Andrea started it. She chopped the onions for me and started it in a small pot. And then, small pot, way bigger than 4 people, us and the girls need. And then she was the one that shifted to the big pot. And as soon as she did that, I didn't say it out loud. As soon as she did it, I'm like, I'm going to make 3 gallons of whatever it is, because I can't stop. And part of my craft in cooking, which I think it is for a lot of home chefs, is to keep going until it tastes right.
Okay.
And a lot of my, big pot stuff, the gumbos and the to vegan chili or whatever, is that building of flavor. So you got to caramelize each item, and it takes forever. And if you can build that flavor, and build that stock, and then put the items in at the right time, which it's not, and it sounds like science, but it's not, it really is just sort of, something I thought would take an hour ends up taking 3 hours because I just forgot, or the heat wasn't right and it didn't really develop enough. Which again is another thing I love. I hate baking, and I won't be a brewer as much as I enjoyed your podcast about brewing. I won't do it because I don't have that, very linear, very protective mindset of saying, 158 degrees. I don't know what that means. And it doesn't, and it's just not fun for me. So the fun part for me is just, keep going. I know the general idea of whatever it is I'm going, but half the time I end up with something different,
Don't go away. We'll be right back after the break with more Wanted, a Midlife Hobby. Have you ever had any really big fails?
Oh God, yeah. No, I've had, what did I do? I did something once, and I made a huge, it might have been it was a jambalaya. I made a jambalaya on the grill, and I think it was one of those additive things which is one of my bigger problems / it's the fun part, is I just kept going and going and going. And then I think I got soy sauce in there or something. And then it ended up being the saltiest thing you could possibly eat. So it was literally, we got a bunch of people together over this giant pan of beautiful looking, with, great andouille sausage in it, shrimp and lobster and everything, and it was gorgeous, that gorgeous deep red from nice fresh tomatoes, and it was inedible. It's the prettiest thing you've ever seen. And then it was like, you get like that. And because it's a baked thing, and I just kept going, and I don't know, I'm sure I was drinking too much and running around. I'm sure people had already shown up, and so I just, whatever I did, it was absolutely inedible. And then of course I burned something every, half the time I burned something. Actually, I figured it out. It's about a third of the time I'll burn something.
Really?
I just forget about it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Is that again because of the wine, or is there other reasons for just
yeah, probably wine and people. I get distracted, and I talk too much, obviously. And so, if people are over, I'm yip yapping and get a bottle of wine in me, I'm going to yip yap more and get in some heated argument about the essence of the color blue or some ridiculous thing. You've been around the club, right? We'll argue about anything.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point of the community, though, right?
Yeah. No, it totally is. It's a lot of fun, which also means I'm not keeping an eye on whatever it is I'm cooking.
Yeah. All right. So if you are cooking,
that's a great tip, actually, for your listeners. Is if you have my personality, then we gotta, I've separated things into slow cook. That if I get to it within the right hour, it's good, right? So it really, and then there's the things that are really quick cook. It's those really sort of well marinated shrimp, on the grill with lime and hot peppers, and some of the but I can cook them and serve them. I don't have to. If I walk away, they'll be ruined. So I'll literally, and then I can serve them,
So that middle time frame, that's your dangerous spot, right? You can do really quick, or you can do long term, but okay. Well, that's good to know. Actually, yeah, I'm pretty distractible, so I think that's really good for me.
Yeah. And there's a lot of great stuff that just require just a little bit of fire or no fire. Ceviche is a great one for me just because I love, people come over, you pour the juice on top, the lime juice on top, and then you can, you're going to serve it in half an hour or whatever. Yeah. And you can't, it's hard to ruin. But if you forget about it, you leave it on the counter, which I've done, then it's ruined, but, or it's not eaten and then ruined. But if you can remember it and you bring it out, then it's hard to ruin it. So,
is there a difference between like what you're using? Because I know, like, from what I've heard, and maybe this is even wrong, but like gas stovetops, for example, are more likely to burn than electric stovetops. Is that right, or does it matter? Is there a difference for you between?
Yeah, I think sort of radiant electric is for shit, and but gas and inductive are the same thing in my mind. So if you got live flame, which has we're finally figuring out that maybe it wasn't the best idea to pump a highly compressed explosive gas into our homes, but we're slowly figuring that out. In 20 years, we won't have gas in homes anymore. It's ridiculous.
Okay,
but especially as our electric grid starts to clean up. But I think inductive is the big leap, right? So I love my grill and I love cooking over flame, right? It's dramatic, it's fun, it can make a crap ton of noise. But flame is a little more extreme. The great thing about it is that when you turn it off, it's off, right? When you turn it down, it's down. When you turn it up, it's up. But all of that to me has more to do with the pan. It has more to do, like, cast iron does a much better job of, you put insulation in the wall, not so that it's always going to be warm or cold inside. You put insulation in the wall so that you transition the exchange of heat on a slower rate, right? That's all it's there for. It's the same with cast iron, right? So you can turn it all the way up on a gas stove or an induction, stove, and it's going to heat up, but it's going to take a little while. If you just have an aluminum pan, it'll be hot like that, and that can oversear. And to me, you're gaining some control if you really need, if you're a restaurant and you're trying to pump out, 20 things in, half an hour, then maybe you need that kind of instant reaction. But, for the rest of us, I think it's a dangerous thing. So I like to keep my flames outside, and then I can I can put some bourbon in there and set it on fire or do whatever, I've ruined a couple microwaves when we used to have a microwave above the stove, I melted microwaves and things like that. Which Andrea loves again, but I think the induction stove is the big winner for me, stovetop, and it's a lot safer, obviously, and then it does a great job if you have the right pans. It does an incredible job, and again, it's the same thing. So because it's inductive, it's a little bit of residual heat from a pan or something, but when you turn it off or you turn it down, it goes right down, just like a gas stove does.
Do you actually use the microwave?
Yeah, all the time. No, I use a microwave. I'm lazy too, so I'm no sort of.
Are there purists? I thought there was something like purists don't use microwaves or something like that.
I'm sure there are. I don't know who the hell they are, but I'm sure there are. I'll speed up. Like if I'm going to make a nice potato something, I'll just speed it up. I'll give it a few minutes in the microwave just as if I'm going to roast potatoes, I want to soften just a bit before I, start cooking whatever it is. Plus I find anything that's just warmed up will absorb whatever it is I'm doing to it, spices or butter or whatever. So.
All right. So you're somebody who has a full-time job. This again is your hobby. And I'm anticipating that people listening to this probably also have a full-time job going on, and if I'm a full-time worker and I say, hey, I don't think I have time for this, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, you're cooking something now, right? All we're talking about is adding a little bit of depth to your spice cabinet, adding a few more, things right next to the stove, whatever it is, or the microwave, whatever you're cooking with, and and just upping it a bit, and so unlike a lot of other hobbies, it's something you're doing every day, and upping that game is a little bit of time, right? And maybe most of the time it's just being able to go to the store, or if you decide to drop some bucks, you can do the home kits, that's probably a great way for a lot of folks to learn how to cook, is to do the home chef thing, whatever it is, Blue Apron, whoever, and then and get their ingredients to folks who are intimidated by the produce section or the meat section. That's actually a great idea. It didn't work on my brother-in-law and sister-in-law. I tried, we bought them a couple kits and it did not get them excited enough to cook. But,
Okay.
but I think it's like any other hobby, right? People say, oh, I'm not going to create, a Chateaubriand, tonight for dinner. So I'm going to just rip the plastic off something and stick it in the microwave. Right. So I think I think there's a huge piece in the middle there that all the rest of us do. And then repetition speeds you up, right? When you do something twice, it's twice as fast. You do something 10 times, it's a tenth the time. If you do something 100 times, you can just do it with your left hand, while being distracted by something else.
Okay. What are the biggest challenges to advancing, or for even somebody to get started? Because you just mentioned that you said your brother-in-law, sister-in-law didn't get started. Like, what do you think are the biggest challenges for people who are thinking about doing this, but they can't seem to get over a hump?
Yeah. Obviously a great pantry and a pot you kind of had some affection for is kind of part of the romance of it. So maybe, and again, I don't think it's a huge investment. The spices are more expensive than the pan, but finding a pan that you really love helps, I think. And then, in your larder, in your pantry, it's just good to have as much sort of room to run as you can. There's some good spice mixes out there, but I think they make you not understand or think about it as much as individual spices. I mean, I get just as lazy as everybody else. So I got to Zatarain's everything, right, and put it on whatever it is. It's on the stove, just out of habit. But I've also already understand what the difference between cumin and cayenne and those things are, because I use them separately. So they're different nose, they're different burn rate, they're different, do different things to. Heck, there's a million different kinds of cayenne, right? So I'll think the cayenne that I pulled out is my other cayenne, and I'll put it in and burn everybody out of the house, right?
Yeah. What are the 5 ingredients I should always have?
Butter, and then all the rest of it's just to make butter pretty. But no, I really think butter or ghee or whatever you want to use is clarified butter is really. I think critical cooking. I love olive oil. And again, for my vegan chili last night, I wasn't allowed to use butter, which is hard for me. But butter is a great ingredient. I think everybody should have obviously a really good black pepper too, because it's an underappreciated spice, I think. And I would splurge for some good salt too, or salt grinder. A good sea salt of some sort, particularly gray sea salt, is just, there's something different. There's something magical in it. It's pixie dust if there ever was any, and it can do wonderful things to everything. To do something sweet. I say I don't bake, but I'll do the baking version of cooking. I make pies and things like that. But it's and then just a little bit of that sea salt is just fantastic. So and then if you want, there's little kits past that, right? So you need some kind of, for me too, dried herbs, which I know is sacrilegious for a lot of real cooks, like chefs. But for me, a good thing of herb de Provence, or a good thing of Italian herbs or whatever, pre-mixed. That way you don't have the basil and the parsley and the thyme and the rosemary and all that kind of stuff. I think that's another critical one, because again, it's about the nose, right? If you're just making eggs and you need a little pinch of Provence in there, and it's all of a sudden it smells like fantastic. It smells wonderful.
Oh, that's awesome.
Secret ingredient, better than bouillon. This isn't an ad, but bouillon and stocks and all that kind of stuff are just fantastic. But my big cheat, my big, sort of lie, they say, how did you get that, last bit of unctuous, like really good umami flavor? It's those little jars of better than bouillon. And they've got them in everything. They've got the roasted chicken, the beef, the veggie, and they are incredible. They even got lobster and mushroom.
Really, it's called Better Than Bouillon.
They're unbelievable. You put that in just about anything, it's going to be delicious.
Cool. Okay, yeah. That's good. I need something like that. Anything I can do to help along would be great. All right, my last 2 questions for you. Number 1, this episode's going to air in February, probably not before Valentine's Day, but since it's thematic, do you have a go-to meal that you would say is a great one to cook for a loved one or loved ones in Valentine's Day?
Yeah, we always had a tradition when the girls were eating mammals of a really nice petite sirloin with a great sort of port wine reduction and some beautiful mushrooms. Again, sauteed in butter, so you get that sort of all that unctuousness and that caramelized butter on the mushrooms, and then after you sear the steaks, the little steaks, you make sure that port and the red wine is picking up all those yummy bits on that cast iron pan. Let it naturally reduce rather than throwing cornstarch, or you could put a little roux in there, so you could do a little. Roux is frankly in probably half the things I make. I just instinctively throw olive oil or butter, olive oil and butter usually in a pan, throw some flour on top and get it to brown up just for whatever I'm doing, making eggs or who knows what. God, there's a million answers for that. I don't know. You stumped me with that one, I think. What else you got?
I'll tell you what, I'll do this. I will save you by just bringing to you the last question I always ask. And that is going to be, if you were talking to somebody who said, look, I want to get more into cooking. To your point, I'll concede the point. We all do cook, right? But somebody who said, I want to make this truly hobby. I'm thinking about it. I think I'm kind of passionate about it. What's your one piece of advice that would help them get started?
I think you ought to invest in that Jacques Pepin and Julia Child's book. It's a great base book. I know it's French cooking or whatever, and don't let that intimidate you. And then I would just read through it. It's French cooking is particularly that kind of French cooking is very family oriented and it's very simple. It's how to treat different kinds of meats and I do want to add to the Valentine's Day list is you got to do a butter poached lobster tail, which is really, it's so simple with a little bit of tarragon on top. And if you just get a nice medium fired cast iron pan with, half an inch of butter and a good butter, good Irish French butter. And then let them defrost because I'm sure they're frozen, we're not professionals. Right. So, and take them out of the tail or leave them in the tail either way. But I like to put them in for a little bit. So you get a little of that lobster shell juice in there in the butter, and then cut them out and then just let them in there real quick. It's another one of those in the category of it happens real quick, so you can't ruin it. Right. And then that butter is just, the butter is fantastic all by itself. So if you just want to dip your bread in that butter, it's fantastic. But then those lobster tails are nice. They come right off onto the plate and go right into your mouth. Nice. And then and that's a great Valentine's Day one, I think. So that little steak and the lobster tail are with the red wine sauce are great. But so to finish the other thought, but I was trying to think of what else we did. There was another tradition, but I can't think of what it was. So anyway, now I'm answering your last question before I'm answering this question.
It's all good. It's all good. It's all good.
Julia Childs, get that book. I mean, I know it's intimidating, but if you want to sort of elevate, which I think is your question, that's a great one to read. And Jacques is like the serious. You read his. It's a great book because it's bifurcated, right? Jacques is one page, and Julia's the other page for the same recipe. And it's really kind of funny because Jacques will say, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. And Julia's like, oh, I don't know. You might do a little bit of this. You might do some of that. You might throw this at it. And if you mess this up, redo this part of it. Don't bother throwing out the whole thing. It's a much more, she's just having fun with it. And he's definitely a chef.
And I get the feeling you're the Julia side of the equation more than the Jacques side. Is that?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll have to dress up like her one time for a party.
Yeah, you know what? If you do, I promise we will take a picture. We'll put it on our Instagram and we'll share it to go along with the episode. Fantastic. All right. Well, Matt Hopkins, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate the time. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah. It's always fun to talk food.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
Now I'm hungry.
All right. Both of us, we'll get off and we'll go eat. Thanks a lot, Matt.
See you, brother.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out our Instagram page, which is @midlife_hobby. Or follow us any place you find podcasts, including Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. And if you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, or give a review on whatever platform you use. Also, I'd love to hear more thoughts and suggestions about other hobbies or speakers. Send an email to midlife.hobby@gmail.com. I'll do everything I can to follow up with you. Special thanks goes to the world-famous chef Julia Child for this episode's inspiration around hobbies. She said, "Cooking may be a creative art, but it's also a wonderful full-time hobby." Hope you'll join us next time for Wanted, a Midlife Hobby.